Fabulous. Okay, my clock's saying 10:30, so we'll make a start. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning. I know a whole bunch of people have emailed saying they want to watch the recording, could make it live today, but thank you for those of you that have made the effort to join myself and David today. I'm not going to say too much because I think David's better off explaining the story and the journey to get to this stage. But ethical investing has been around in our industry and the profession and investment world for probably 20 plus years. But when you looked underneath the bonnet of what was going on at the start of the journey, it was almost like people were ticking boxes and just having a little bit of ethical stuff, just to be able to say that their fund was ethical. It's really evolved over the last 10 years, and I think what we've done with via wills and trusts in the discretionary fund manager is they've taken ethical investment to a whole new level. But I don't want to say too much and spoil any of the language David's going to explain or anything like that. I'm more than happy to say that all I'm going to do is sit here and ask questions. I've had a couple of questions come in advance that I've already got ready to ask. The chat box and the question and answer box will be monitored by me. So if you see me leaning forward, it's not because I'm trying to show you my nose hairs. It's because I'm keeping an eye on what you guys are asking. Ask questions all the way through, guys. If David says anything you want a clarification on, if I think it's relevant, I'll drop it in as we're going. Otherwise, after David's just gone through a small presentation about how we've got here and what the Attenborough scale is we're launching is all about, we'll take some questions at the end and hang around for as long as people need. So this is David Basher. For those who haven't watched any of our videos, I'm sure everyone who's on this call now has watched at least one of the videos over the last couple of years. And I'll leave you, David, to dive in.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Craig. Miranda, could you start the presentation and perhaps go straight to the second slide, if you could do that? That would be great. And hopefully everybody will be able to see these slides as they click in. They haven't started yet, but here we go. Great. So if you could go straight to the second slide. That's close. That's the fifth slide. So if we go to the second slide, that would be great. Give that a go.
Well, you're seeing the slides, but I'm not. So there's the first. There
we go. We love technology, don't we?
Oh, God. Ree, have you done it? Because I've not seen it my end.
Well, in that case, just leave that where that is. Let's just leave that where it is, Craig. Because like us, in our IFI practice, I mean, the reason why you and I got together with, the other dozen or so IFAs to create our own, look at that, it's all moving about in front of us.
Well, you're seeing it, David. I'm not seeing it. Is anyone at their end seeing the presentation?
The slides sort of coming in, sort of going out, that kind of thing. So
it works perfectly in practice, everyone.
There you are. So would you like to oh, look at that. There we go. Stay there. Don't change anything. So you can see the first slide, everybody. So what you can see in front of you is probably a real artistic masterpiece. So this was drawn by my son Jack when he was 4. He's now 5. So he drew this when he was 4. And this was during the second lockdown. This happened. He drew this, and this is when we had to have the kids at home. I'm sure you've all had the kids at home or grandchildren at home, whatever it is, where you had to do the homeschooling. And so Jack literally did 6 weeks at school before he was thrown out for the lockdown. And on one of these times, we had to do painting, drawing. So I could do some work. I just gave him a bit of paper and said, "Draw what you want, Jack. Just draw what you want." He came back with this. And in this masterpiece, I said, "What's this you got here, Jack?" And he said, "Well, look, Daddy, see that little man on the left-hand side?" He said, "That's you." I went, "Okay, thanks very much. Obviously got no body, but that's a good start." He said, "And that's me down the bottom." And I said, "Jack," I said, "why have you got 3 legs?" He said, "Don't be silly, Daddy, that's my willy." So, which is I was quite pleased with it at the time, obviously. I said, "What's that great big thing that you can see?" He said, "Well, that's the coronavirus." Which shows the impact that it had on everybody at the time, and still today, even though we're coming out of it. But I show this really to demonstrate what all this type of investing that we're talking about now is that none of it's about us. Whoever's watching this, if you invest ethically, if you invest in a green way, if you invest in a sustainable way, whatever sort of language you want, hardly any of that's going to really impact us in the investment side. Yes, the returns will impact us. But the sort of actions that we're taking, so we're talking about impacting our families. And so this is quite an interesting thing, because usually when you invest and you pick your investment objectives and what things you're going to go into your asset allocation model, it's all based on you and what sort of returns you want, what sort of risks you want to take, whether you want a straight line on your investments, whether you want it to go up and down, whether you want to run up and down quickly or slowly, that kind of stuff. It's all about us. Whereas actually, when you invest in perhaps an ethical way or a green way, sustainable way, whatever language you want to use, it's actually about the world we want to leave to our children and our grandchildren. And yes, they may or not get better or worse performance. That's a separate thing which we'll talk about. But actually, you're doing it because of your moral conviction or your ethical conviction and that kind of thing, which is quite a different thing when it comes to investing compared to anything you might have done. Now, if we can perhaps click to the next slide, it'll just have these great big initials that say ESG. And ESG is these horrible letters which our dreadful industry has decided to use to mean green, to mean ethical, to mean whatever it is. Most people don't understand what ESG means, because if you think about that E, for example, what does that stand for? Well, does that mean investing into environmentally, something like that? And if you want to click through the slides, Rihanna, that'd be great. Or does it mean you're investing in an ethical way? Because investing ethically is different from investing in an environmental way. And with the S for sustainable, does that mean that it is sustainable, or does it mean you're trying to be socially responsible? And with G, what does that mean? Does it mean you're trying to invest in a green way, or you're trying to improve governance? And really nobody understands it. Nobody understands it at all. And when a lot of our clients, and a lot of Craig's clients and the other IFAs we work with have said, we want to build something that's kind of ethical or environmentally friendly, all those kind of words. We've always had them to say, well, what does that mean? Because I know that my idea of ethics is probably different to Craig's, and my idea of socially responsible is different from my mum, and my idea of green is different to my brother. So how is it that we can create anything like that we all understand and kind of have the same measurement tool? And then about 2 years ago, as soon as it came out, I read the book that you can see in front of you, which is David Attenborough's last book called Life on Our Planet, which if you've not read it, read it. It really is a tremendous book. And he talks about his life in TV, but more importantly, he talks about the things that we need to do to protect our planet. And in fact, if you go to the next slide, you'll see there's actually a quote in it. On page 202, there's a quote which says, "In a sustainable world, our banks and pension investment companies would only invest in sustainable companies." And when I read that, I suddenly thought, this is the point. This is what it means. I bet if I bought an investment, in fact, I'm not sure any of you, if you bought an investment, whether you bought a share, a unit trust, whatever, I bet every one of you would know whether or not it would be an investment that would make David Attenborough happy or not. I bet almost there's like a visceral understanding of what he would think would be acceptable. Because I'm sure, if you went to bought shares in BP or Shell, for example, you'd probably get that actually that's probably not what David Attenborough was talking about when he talks about sustainable investment. And in this book, he talks about 5 things to focus on in trying to protect our planet. So can we click to the next slide, please? And in those 5 things, what he said is, if you just click to bring 5 things up, that would be great. He said, these are 5 things that we need to do to protect our planet. And he talks around, first of all, population control. His view is that we need to control the growth of the population and ultimately restrict that to some degree. He talks about somehow developing renewable energy, not anymore living off of oil and all those kind of things. He talks about rewilding. By rewilding, he's talking about the areas that we've laid waste to in sub-Sahara. How do we actually bring that back into to have more forests and that kind of stuff, which is the 4th one as well, which is deforestation. How do we stop the destruction of forests and everything that we know that actually creates the oxygen for us? And then lastly, he talks about the power of a plant-based diet. And that doesn't mean, let's all be vegans and vegetarians. What he talks about in the book is that actually, if everybody ate the majority of our meals which were plant-based, then that massively reduces the drain on the planet. Because, if we eat beef, then you've got to grow cattle that have eaten all the plants, so you have all these different things which actually increase the drain on the planet. So when we saw that, we thought, that's a great starting point to say, if we could perhaps build portfolios that David Attenborough would be happy with, would that be the way to create this, this ethical or this green or the sustainable type of investments? But it's hard to do it based on those 5 things. I mean, if you just saw those 5 things, literally, how do you go about building an investment portfolio based on those? Because, You can't really go and buy a load of investments which stop deforestation. It doesn't work that way. And then in the book, Attenborough talks about a lady called Professor Kate Raworth, who's a professor at the Oxford University. And in her book, she has a book called Donut Economics. She talks about the 9 things that we need to do to further develop, not just to protect the planet, but to create an economy which is sustainable. By sustainable, she means one that doesn't destroy the planet. So she's taken effectively David Attenborough's view of these 5 things we've got to do, but how can we actually create those 5 things and create an economy around that? Because let's be honest, I can't ever imagine, Boris saying, "Okay, everybody, we're going for no growth anymore because that's better for the planet," and accepting that the UK would drop out of the G7. That's never going to happen. No politician is going to say, "Actually, it's better to protect the planet, so we're going to drop out the G7. We don't want any growth anymore." Because, of course, all politicians want growth, because when the economy grows, that means it knocks the debt out of the equation as the economy grows. And that's what creates wealth for all of us. So the question is, how do you grow an economy, but do that in a sustainable way, in a way that doesn't destroy the planet? And that's the thing which Kate Raworth attacked. And she did that by focusing on these 9 areas. So, Rhiannon, if you can just click through, and it'll bring these 9 different areas up. And if you just click through, that'll be fine. So what she's saying is that we need to create businesses and industries that don't create climate change. We need to build industries that either protects from ocean acidification, or more importantly, don't make it any worse. We need to create industries that do not have chemical pollution, that do not damage the planet from that point of view. We have to build industries which reduce this nitrogen phosphate loading, which is effectively the over-fertilization of the ground, which causes long-term problems. We need to focus on businesses which focus on genuine fresh water and getting that fresh water to the right people at the right time, instead of, dare I say, filling over plastic bottles up in France and then transferring them all around the world and drinking water. We need to find a way which does it in a different way and focus on fresh water in another way. We need to find ways to look at the way that we're protecting the land so that brownfield sites become greenfield sites. We need to focus on biodiversity, because that's where all the drugs come from. Right? We need to increase the biodiversity, or at least protect what we've got. We need to focus on industries that don't cause air pollution, or perhaps don't make air pollution any worse than it is. And lastly, we need to focus on those businesses which protect the ozone, because we're all aware what happens with that. So what Kate Raworth has done is to say we need to build an industries and a gross domestic product measurement which is based around these 9 things, rather than just saying we need just to grow the economy. And so that's what we've decided to do. We've said, okay, why don't we build investment portfolios which focus on those 9 things? Why don't we build investment portfolios whereby we do no harm in any of these areas, and in an ideal world where we improve things? And that was our starting point. Say, this is going to be our definition of green, our definition of sustainable, our definition of ethical, all those things. We're going to use this as a definition, because if we can build investments which don't do any damage in those 9 areas, those are going to be the things that make David Attenborough happy. Now, if you could perhaps click to the next slide, please, Jan. There's a bit of legislation that was put in place in the EU called the EU Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulations. Wonderfully titled bit of legislation. And of course, we're not in the EU anymore, so we don't have to comply with it. But what it basically says is that there are 2 ways. If you want to invest in a green way, an ethical way, there are 2 ways of doing it. One of what are known as Article 8. The other one's what's known as Article 9. Now, by Article 8, that means you're investing in the industry. It's now been called light green, okay, because 3 lights kind of like jargon. And light green, or Article 8 investments, mean that they're trying to improve the world from a sustainable point of view, but there's an intention to make an improvement. There's no actual action being taken, right? There's an intention. So, for example, you could buy an investment in a company which intends to be carbon neutral, and that's your version of green. So if you take, for example, there's the Invesco Perpetual Sustainable Fund, which, if on the face of it looks like it would be sustainable, looks like it would be green, until you dig into it. you find that 8th largest investment is Daimler. Now, we don't need to be told that Daimler makes diesel engines. Now, I really don't buy the idea that making diesel engines is something that's going to protect our planet, that's going to be more green and more sustainable. So when you speak to the fund manager, the investor will say, well, why are you buying this investment? And their answer is, well, because their intention is to be carbon neutral by 2050. Well, about you, that's not really what I'm on about. If I want to do this, if I want to build a world for Jack, my son, by the time in 50, he's going to be in his 30s or something. So I want to do something about it now, and that's what Article 9 is. Article 9 is about only buying those investments that have a policy of doing no harm to the planet, and so that's been our foundation, is to say, going forward, we will only buy those investments that do no harm to the planet. In a perfect world, they kind of do some good as well, but the starting point is to do no harm. Because what's really tough is to buy those investments which actually do good things for the planet. And there are some out there, but that's quite a tough thing. So the starting point is to say, let's do no harm, which is that, the basis, the starting point. And virtually no one's doing this. No one's doing this thing of doing no harm. Everyone's doing this Article 8. Because what you're seeing is this thing that the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, are calling whitewashing, greenwashing. And in fact, last July, they sent out a letter, an open letter to all the finance companies, all the investment companies, saying, please stop claiming that your stuff is green, your stuff is sustainable, when it's not. Light green is not sustainable. Light green is not green. Light green is not environmentally friendly. The intention to be environmentally friendly is not good enough. You actually have to be environmentally friendly, which is Article 9. So we've made our stand and saying, here's our line in the sand, which is we'll only buy investments and use investments for our clients where they do no harm, and moving on to them doing good continuously. Could you go on to the next slide for me, which will have a triangle. If you can click it again, you'll see the triangle moves to two sides. And so what we've done is we've created what we call the Attenborough scale. And the Attenborough scale is a means by which anybody whose investments we manage can choose how much of their investments are sustainable. Let's use that. I'm going to use that word going forward, sustainable. So effectively what we've done is we've created a second triangle, which is one which David Attenborough would be happy with, and there's the one which he would not be happy with. And there's a line between them, and any one of you that where we manage your investments through Penguin can decide, well, where do I want to be on that scale from now on? Is it a case that actually I don't care, I don't have kids, I really don't care, so I don't care whether they're green or ethical or sustainable, I'm going to stick with the standard investments, which may, by the way, include some green things or some sustainable things, but that's not the objective. When we're buying the investments in that on that triangle on the left-hand side, say, we're buying the ones which we think will produce the best performance. So, for example, if you buy shares in BAT Industries, British American Tobacco, that will be in most of our portfolios. If you have a standard, if you're in the standard, triangle which you'll all invest in, then virtually everyone's got British American Tobacco in there. Why? Well, because it's very stable. It chucks out 2-3% dividends continuously, and it's not suddenly going to crash anytime tomorrow. But then you've got to ask yourself, is selling tobacco, which predominantly goes to poor people, more poor people smoke than people that don't, is that ethical? Is it right socially that we damage the people around the world that don't have the knowledge or the capability, so they smoke when they really shouldn't? So it really doesn't support society. Is it really right to have acres and acres and acres of tobacco growing when perhaps we could be growing soy or other stuff to feed the world? So BAT Industries is certainly not the type of investment which would really make David Attenborough happy and really isn't sustainable. Now you go to the other side, we've got a triangle which has all the investments within that meet that criteria of doing no harm, if that makes sense, and all being Article 9, all being dark green. Could you click to the next slide for me, please? So what that means is that you have the choice to go between these two triangles, and that might mean you decide to have none. It might decide you might go 100% Attenborough, It might mean you say, I'm going to stick my toe in the water. I'm going to go 90%, 10%. So 90% standard, 10% Attenborough, for example. Or you might say, I'll go 50-50. The choice is yours. They're in 10% increments. What it means is that those people that want to invest in a sustainable way or socially responsible way now have the option to do that in the darkest green and the most Article 9 way possible. And you can mix that in with your investments. It doesn't matter whether you're in an ISA, it doesn't matter in your pension, it doesn't matter if you're in general investment, it doesn't matter what it is, you can have that mix. Now, as you can see from there, the investments in both will always be volatile, right? All investments, unless you just go and shove the money in the bank, go up and down, you know. And I'm sure all of you have been wondering what's happening at the moment with Mr. Putin being rather aggressive around the world, and you know, all investments go up and down. And one thing which is clear is that if you invest in sustainable investments by their very nature will be more volatile than ordinary investments. So by ordinary, let's use bat industry as an example again. The fact that Mr. Putin has suddenly invaded Ukraine does not mean that the share of the value of the shares of bat industries will go down. People will still smoke regardless, has no impact. But on the other side, if you think of industries which are sustainable, well, they tend to be things which are not invested in oil and that kind of stuff. And so when the price of oil goes up, what you'll see is that the price of other investments go down because money's taken out by other investments to go into oil, because the price of oil goes up whenever there's any form of disruption in the world. So what you'll see is much more volatility in sustainable investments. They will be more volatile until they become the mainstay, often because they tend to be a lot smaller companies than those companies which are in, so should we say, the standard client level. So there's not necessarily more risk because over time, and you know, we're really looking at about a 5-year time horizon. If you want to take all your money out within 5 years, you probably should not be investing in sustainable investments because they're very volatile and it's a very new area and nobody really knows how that performance will stand. So if we think in the long term, then the risk, you know, winds out over the long term. So the risk will be the same over the long term, but in the short term, it's going to be much more volatility. So you really shouldn't look at these investments perhaps over that short term. So that's really where we are. You all now have this opportunity to add sustainable investments that would make David Attenborough happy by sliding up the Attenborough scale. And I know that the advisors at Penguin and Craig at Penguin can help you with that, whether it's just a case of I want 10% and then they'll just organise that for you, or whether you want to go on and perhaps reassess where you are in the investment triangle based on objectives, or I'm sure they can do that. So I don't drag on too long, because I know I've been going on about 25 minutes about this. Perhaps I can go back to Craig, and perhaps we can lose the presentation area. And then Craig, perhaps if there's any things that I know you had said you had some questions come in, you might have had some going through that perhaps we could talk about.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you, David. You know, it's not the first time I've heard that, but I still learn something new every time. So thank you for that. Let's for those who join a bit later, let's maybe just ask that question about Putin. You referred to it just as before we get on to the ethical questions that I've got, and I've had a couple come in. What are the investment committee thinking right now around this Russia-Ukraine thing?
Okay, now it depends if you want the 3-hour answer or you want the 3-minute soundbite. So there's several things. And let's start with the first one. Is that all our investments were rejigged quite significantly about 2 or 3 weeks ago, something like that. And a big part of that was because of the concerns that the investment committee had with regards to uncertainties, with regards to political uncertainty. Investment performance is driven by the economic situation, the political decision. The economy is quite easy to predict, the politics aren't. And I've got to be honest, I don't think any of us really thought that Putin would really do what he just did this morning. Most of us thought he's just playing about. He might go in at the edges, try and take a bit of territory. What he's done this morning is clearly something that nobody would have expected. So the fact that we had done all that rejigging in the last couple of weeks will help quite a great deal. Now you will see some movement in portfolios because all the markets around the world this morning have fallen to some degree. That will be temporary. But there is this short-term knee-jerk reaction. But a lot of that was priced in to the markets over the last month or so. Now the question is, how does it affect things going forward? Well, the obvious thing is that all of those industries which rely on oil as a resource or as a raw material are going to be hit to some degree, simply because costs are going to go up. Oil prices will go up even further from where they are now, simply because so much of that oil is controlled by Russia. And as soon as we start saying, right, it depends how far, Boris and everybody else wants to go. I mean, really what they should be saying, right, we're not going to buy any more oil from Russia. They're not going to do that. Right? This is the thing. It's, everyone's going to jump up and down saying you shouldn't do that, Mr. Putin, but no one's prepared to do anything about it. What's going to happen, though, is that you'll see a massive amount of movement by NATO into the countries on the borders around Ukraine and the Black Sea. So you're going to see that kind of focus rather than a focus of actually doing anything. So we're not actually doing anything. Probably Ukraine is gone now. I think, rest of the world have to accept that he's invaded. He will massively go in and destroy whatever good there is in that country, and no one in the West is going to be dominant enough to say, actually, we're not prepared to do that, Putin. We're going to go to war with you. No one's going to do that. So we're not going to have this all-out war that everyone's predicting, but there will be a war in Ukraine, which will probably be short-lived. Russia, they said the USSR, didn't they? Russia has the second biggest army in the world after China, and Ukraine would be able to do nothing about that, and so it will be a very quick thing. Within a month or so, they'll take control, and most of the horrible acts that we see happening will have stopped at that point. And then it's just a question of can they maintain Russia? Now, what you're going to see is any products which come through Russia, which are things like gas. So, for example, a huge amount of gas comes through Russia. As Biden has now said that they will not open the next gas pipeline. That means the price of gas will continue to go up. The price of wheat will go up considerably because 10% of the world's wheat comes from Ukraine, and most of that will be destroyed during the course of this. So things which depend on wheat, which is virtually every foodstuff, you're going to look at any bit of packaging and you look at how much it has wheat in it. Like virtually everything has wheat in it, anything that's processed. So what you're going to see is foodstuffs increase, that kind of stuff, which is going to cause inflation higher than anyone expected. Everyone's expecting inflation to go up, but higher than anyone's expected. So what does that do from the investment committee? What does that tell the investment committee? One of the things which we knew we were looking to do is to reduce the term on bonds and gilts. So whenever interest rates goes up, bonds and gilts tend to do less well. Because if you've got a bond or gilt that's, say, paying 1% and new ones issued at 2%, no one buys this one, they buy the 2% one, so the 1% one goes down in value. So the way to deal with that, because we all need bonds and gilts in our portfolios to give some stability, is to reduce the term of those bonds and gilts. And prior to November, in September, the average date of our gilts and bonds was probably standing at 5 to 7 years. That's been reduced dramatically to be sub 2 years, because what we know is bonds and gilts, which have a maturity date of less than 2 years, tend to not get hit by interest rate movements. So that's one of the things that's been done and will be focused on. In the same way that we know that when you have this kind of political uncertainty, generally, let me be blunt, companies that sell weapons tend to do better than companies that don't sell weapons and that kind of thing. So that tells us where we should be looking to invest. But of course, if you're looking to be sustainable, buying weapons is not really something that you really want to do. Now, when it comes to the investment committee each quarter sets an asset allocation model for the next quarter, what we intend to see happen over the next quarter. But of course, stuff happens that we don't know. And that's why there's a thing called a tactical asset allocation, which is a monthly movement, a sort of slight movement of the asset allocation to either take advantage or protect us from things which are happening month to month. And that tactical asset allocation meeting happens next week, which will no doubt take account of what's happening with recruiting at the moment. So that's my kind of like shortened answer, if that helps you.
Well, thanks for the shortened one. Okay, so the question I know is, since we launched this in Penguin a couple of months ago and been using it with existing clients when they come in for their forward planning meetings and then any new discovery meetings, the easiest question I get, David, I'm sure you've had the same, is what is going to do better?
Well, sustainable, non-sustainable?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I know the answer to that, and that is I don't know, and nobody knows. And this is, it's interesting, isn't it? Everybody says that they want to invest for the long term. Yet everybody gets upset when something doesn't do well over 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever. Whereas actually, it's the performance in the long term. The only thing that counts is when you take the money out, what's it worth, not what the journey is. And so the question really is, I suppose, is how long is your time horizon? The longer your time horizon, the more you can deal with volatility. The shorter your time horizon, the less you can do. And that means your genuine time horizon, not your how often you're going to look at it. Now, if you've got a pension, say, and let's say you've got £500,000 in the pension, and you're taking that £1,000 a month, well, the volatility doesn't affect it to any great degree, although you want a straighter line. But I'm talking about when you've got access to the majority of the money. So the time horizon sets that where your objective should be. And in honesty, nobody has any idea whether sustainable investments, those that make their investment happy, will be better or worse than the other. Nobody knows, because no one's done this before. We've back tested, but the furthest we could go back was 18 months, and that's not anything like enough to give us an idea. What we do know that they will be significantly more volatile, just because there tend to be lots of smaller companies within it, and smaller companies tend to be more volatile. So the first thing I'll say is actually nobody knows, and it's going to be one of those things that we just have to accept, and that if you go into sustainable investments, at this stage you should be going into them because you have a moral or ethical reason to do so, not because you think they're going to do better or worse. I mean, you might have a view on that. My view is that I think they'll do better over the longer term, because over the longer term, I think those industries that cause problems in the world, that perhaps cause more pollution, or perhaps put more carbon into the environment, will be taxed heavy and that kind of thing. So I think ultimately they'll do worse. And so I think ultimately they'll do better. So all my investments are now sustainable, all of them, because I'm not going to spend all my money before I die, and most of it's going to go down to my 3 kids. So I think that's my time horizon is actually not when I'm going to spend it or when I'm going to die. It's going to be when they're going to spend it. So that's the way of looking at it. And there's this thing, isn't there? Is that I was listening to this on radio the other day. When's the best time to plant a tree? The Chinese say. The answer is 20 years ago. Second best time is today. Right now, if you want to be ethical, if you want to be sustainable, do it today. Now, in 20 years' time, I'm telling you, it will look good. It may look, spindly during that growth process, but it depends when your time horizon is. So the honest answer is nobody really knows, Craig. It's just a matter of opinion at the moment. We have no models to build it on, which is one of the difficult things.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you said there about the Chinese and the tree. I mean, when a client says to me when was the best time to invest, I always say yesterday. It's always yesterday, isn't it? Okay, so yeah, thank you, Janet. So Janet said surely it's better to wean ourselves off fossil fuels as quickly as possible. Yeah, I don't think there's anything we've heard to say otherwise today. So question in the chat, David, is there a difference in fees charged for managing the standard versus the ethical?
There's nothing which we charge or you charge. It's exactly the same. However, sometimes it is more expensive to buy some of these investments because of the nature of them. The difference is so minute, it's not even worth measuring. When we've looked at across the board, and most of us will have 15 to 25 investments in our portfolio, as in funds, right? Most of us have that kind of mix. And if you look at the extremes of sustainable and the extremes of non-sustainable, the standard ones, it's about 0.01. I mean, it's just tiny. However, there is one thing which is interesting, is if you want to buy really, 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 really cheap investments, which you can do, and some of our clients focus on fees and they want the cheapest thing, well, then you don't choose a stock picker, because that's what a fund manager is. A fund manager is a stock picker. What you do is you buy the index. Instead of trying to find the best smaller company, you buy all of the smaller companies. And that's called buying the index. And if you want a really cheap investment, you buy the index. People talk about tracker funds. You hear it all the time. Trackers are cheap and that kind of stuff because no one's managing them. So they are cheap. But understand if you go for cheap, you can't have sustainable. Because if you buy a tracker fund, you buy all the good and all the bad. So if you go down the route of sustainability, by definition, it is stock picking. But when it comes to cost, there really isn't much difference between the two.
I'd just like to add to that. I mean, obviously, with the changes we made recently, obviously with the power of what we've been working towards, David, over the last 2-3 years, I noticed that we've managed to start getting some big discounts on the overall funds in the portfolio. So I know the portfolio costs have dropped quite a bit over the last 3 months or so, anyway, haven't they?
Yeah, it's one of those things that we've been working on, because one advantage that we have is that because we started Trustee FM as a fund manager for IFAs, and it's owned by IFAs. Now, we're not making money for these external shareholders. It's not built as a business to make money. It's there to produce things for all of our clients, your clients, my clients, clients of the other dozen or so IFAs that use it. And so whenever we can get discounts, our focus is to pass those straight onto the client. You go and invest with Hargreaves Lansdown and they get discount, they keep the money. That's how they make their money. They'll charge you 0.8, 0.9, 1% for an investment, even though they're getting it at 0.6 or something. That's how they make their money, the big money. Whereas our view is, well, Trustee FM isn't there as this profit machine. It's there to provide a great service so that we all benefit. And because we're managing, my company's money, your company's money, all these other companies' money, that's a large amount that's been invested. So when we buy an investment, it means we can get discounts, which if we all bought it individually, we can't get. If any one of your clients went to buy any of the investments that we buy, they're going to pay at least twice what we're buying it for, and in some cases 3 times. And so as we've grown and we manage more money, it means we get bigger and bigger discounts. And I know that your view is very much mine, is that Penguin's view is let's pass these discounts on to the clients, because the clients pay you to manage the financial advice and the financial planning, that kind of stuff. Your job isn't to try and rake a little bit off at the top, which you see in so many companies are doing that. So I know that you pass them on straight away, which is why you see that the fund fees going down continuously. And I would anticipate in 2, maybe 3 years' time, if they are half of what they are now, I'd be surprised if it was that much.
Okay, well, thank you for that. One of the questions I had come in advance was, can you explain the relationship between the two? Do they do different things at different times, as in sustainable and non-sustainable? I think someone's worried that they're actually completely different things and might react differently in different markets.
Yeah, there is a relationship. There's 2 relationships. The first one is, if you think about, well, look, I don't know if you can see this on the camera. Imagine you've got a pen, right? And so think of standard investments here and think of sustainable here. When everything moves up and down, they generally move in the same direction, but this end moves more. All right, so that's why you have more volatility. So they tend to move at the same time. Now that's really good when it's down there, because you'll move up really quickly. But when it does that, it will go down really quickly. So there's that increased volatility. So there is that relation. Generally, on 90% of the investments, they tend to move in tandem. There is about 10% when they move in opposite directions. Oil being a big example. So if you look at the shares of BP and Shell, I haven't checked this morning, but I bet they're up. And that's because, guess what? Oil price will go up. That means BP and Shell will make more profit. Now, if the reason why the shares for BP and Shell go up is more people are buying them, that means they've got to sell the shares from somewhere else. So they're selling them from things which don't benefit from oil price increases, which tend to be sustainable ones. So what you probably see is when oil price goes up, you'll see the value of sustainable investments probably go down because people are pulling money out and putting them into oil. And of course, that'll be reversed when that goes back. And I don't know if you remember that quote. I know you and I on many conferences over the years have spoke about many investment professionals, but Warren Buffett, if we accept that he's the best investor in the world, there's 2 things that I remember of Warren Buffett. The one is how many people took the mickey out of him in 2003 when he refused to invest in tech stocks, and his investments were virtually doing nothing. Everybody else said, well, I'm getting 10, 20%. No. Warren Buffett's lost it, And then come 2004, when there was the big crash and these people losing like 70%, all that kind of stuff. And of course, he just carried on. It was like, okay, I get that. And I very much in the same way that a lot of clients might say, well, we should put more money into the US because the US is growing. And our view was the US is overheated. Well, then you've seen that massive correction that you saw at the beginning of the year, with the US coming down to do that correction. Now we can see that with Warren Buffett. The second thing that he always said is that when other people are scared, I'm greedy. When other people are greedy, I'm scared. So we all know we should buy low and sell high. None of us ever do it, right? Ever. Because guess what? When stuff goes down, we get scared. And we jump on the last thing which went well. It's quite interesting, isn't it? When people see stuff going up and down and their investment might go down, they jump on the thing which went up, which usually is the wrong time to go on, jump on it. It's already gone up. Now, if I look at sustainable investments over the last month, I would say probably not all of them, 80% of the investments in that triangle have gone down over the last month by, 7-8%, something like that, perhaps even more, which makes it a perfect time to get in. But of course, lots of people will be scared. That's how I want it to start going up again before I go back into it, which of course is the wrong thing to do. But I understand it. When it's easy to say when it's not your money, but when it's somebody else's money, you need to have that confidence saying, okay, I accept it's gone down, therefore now's a good time. Now, if you think about what's happening, with sustainable investments at the moment, that I would say they may and may not be at the bottom. Who knows? But what I can say is that give it 3 years' time when the oil price is settled, then they'll start to escalate quite significantly, and time to make a lot of money is when they're down. So there is a relationship to them. It's just the biggest relationship is the volatility more than anything else.
Okay, I think someone must have maybe had a frozen moment a little while ago because the question's coming again about where. I think you've already answered it, but where are you invested personally was the question. So maybe they froze for a second.
Yes, okay. So I've got 3 kids, and as I said earlier, I'm investing for them more than anything else. I, like you, never intend to retire. I love what I'm doing too much. So until they throw me out and carry on doing what I'm doing. So I've moved everything right to 100% Attenborough. I've said, you know what? I've got the courage of my convictions, and that's what I'm going to do. Same with my kids. I moved them all up there. Now, I'm not saying everybody should do. That's not what I'm saying. You've got to, for me, my moral thing. In fact, I had this conversation with my wife. One of the things I love in life are Jeeps, and one of the things I've wanted for a long time is to have like an army Jeep, with no roof, no arms, like proper Jeep. And
like the A-Team.
Yeah, that's it. And I said to Suzanne, I said, look, for the start, I want to go and buy a Jeep and take the roof off, the sides off. So on those 3 days a year when it's sunny and I can drive about, around Buckinghamshire where I live, like this. And she said to me, David, if you're trying to help people invest in a sustainable way, I don't think it's on that you should be driving around in a 4-litre Jeep. I couldn't argue with that one. So, part of it is like, well, perhaps I've got to force myself to go up that way. But of course, that doesn't mean you shouldn't buy a Jeep. I'm not saying that.
Yeah. Well, that leads into the other question that's coming in the chat then. So, and I've had this a couple of times. I'm sure you have. What the question is, what are you seeing most clients do? I've had a couple of clients say that to me, or what do you think I should do? And obviously, I think we've got to be careful there. What's your response to that?
Well, it's interesting. In month of January, we tend to meet the majority of our clients in January. We do workshops with them. So I've had conversations, we worked out the other day with 312 clients over the course of January, specifically discussing this. And what I've noticed is 2 or 3 kind of actions. The first one is I've noticed those people that manage money for grandchildren or children, like, lifetime ISAs, junior ISAs, trust funds, that stuff. Those people almost, without exception, moved 100% Attenborough, those portfolios, because it's their money. That money is not going to be accessed for way more than 4 or 5 years. So I see that a lot. I've also seen a large number of people who are conscious of their carbon footprint, if I put it that way, going right up the Attenborough scale. I've seen that. I've also seen a large number of people who said, I don't really care, and they just stay down, the left-hand side, say, I'm not interested in this at all, and that's perfectly fine. And then the rest, so you seem to see these people at the extremes, and then I see a lot of people are tipping their toe in the water. You know, perhaps going 30-40% Attenborough, because they're saying, we don't know. We'd like to be up there, but you know, we don't know what's going to happen. So let's have a toe in the water. So if it does take off, we're there. And
I think that links into what you just said then about don't care. I think it's not that the language is not that they don't care; they're just afraid to because they haven't got the history, whereas they know at least the traditional has got the history. Isn't it?
You say that. I have had a number that said, "I don't care." Right.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of people that are scared because they don't know. But I think those have tended to say, right, I'm going to go 10, 20, 30, 40, just so because I feel I should be doing something. You know, I had when doing one of these workshops, one of the clients said to me, he said, I can't decide where to go. He said, but I know I've got, you know, I'm seeing my grandchildren, because this chap was, I don't know, 60, something like that. He said, I'm seeing my grandchildren at the weekend. And he says, and I know at some point, you know, they're going to say to me, okay, Granddad, what's your thing? What are you doing? And he said, I can't just say I've just done a bit of recycling. He said, I want to be able to say, well, I've put all my investments which are there to do no harm to the planet and ideally make things better for the planet. He said, so based on that, he says I'm not going 100% now. He says, I'm going to go a third up there and then, you know, over the years, perhaps kind of like phase into the thing. So you tend to have these extremes, people at each end and then people that kind of dipping their toe in the water. What I don't see is very many people in the 60, 70, 80, 90% kind of like area. I see that people that, you know, they'll go anywhere from 0 to 40 or 100%. It's quite interesting. There's hardly anybody that I've seen in that, you know, 50 to 100% area.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's similar for our experiences so far. I've got two final questions, and when we bring it all up, unless anyone wants to type anything else in, that one of these came in advance, and one of them as we went. Someone's asked whether, listening to you about the Article 8, Article 9, they've asked, is it possible for the Attenborough scale to be 100% Article 9 right now? Are there enough investments available for you to invest in 100% Article 9?
No, we are about 80% Article 9, and there's 20% Article 8. The biggest challenge is buying fixed interest, actually, is to buying gilts and bonds, which are Article 9, because there actually are no Article 9 gilts available. Despite what the government have said, there are none available. So we have to buy gilts from countries which we think are the most sustainable, you know, which is a tough thing. Now, our principle going forward is we will never buy anything which is not Article 9 going forward. But there is about this 20% where we had no alternative because there actually are no gilts which are sustainable at the moment, which are available on a tradable basis. Although most governments have said they're going to bring these in, no one's actually brought anything in which you can actually buy and trade at the moment. Because what we don't want to do is to buy illiquid, because there are some bonds, just to clarify, are loans to companies. And there are some which are available, but they're not very liquid. And the last thing any of us want is if you want to take the money out, not be able to take money out. So we'll only buy those things which are totally liquid, which are tradable on a daily basis.
Fabulous. So the final question that's come in the chat is, can you give a few more examples of what else would be in dark green or sustainable, the no harm category? And maybe, and I'll ask one as well. So I like it when you explained it to me way back when we started this journey. Maybe you could explain where Tesla sit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me explain. Let me give some examples of companies which, you know, are dark green, which are Article 9, and I'll tell you where Tesla sits. So let me give you an example of 3 different investments: a very small company, medium-sized company, a very large company that fits within that. So one investment we have in is a company called Ilka, which is a company which was built on the back of Southampton University, who developed a new bit of lithium battery technology. Part of the problems with lithium batteries is obviously when they die and the problems of disposing of them. Some of them burn, you know, and cause fires, but also they have this problem with the amount of liquid electrolytes within it. That's what causes the problem. And Southampton University developed a new technique which reduces the liquid electrolytes in it, which increases the life expectancy by about doubling, which means you need half as many being produced. And also gives better performance. So that's one of the companies that's invested in. So it's a small company so it doesn't make this technology, it licenses the technology to people manufacture lithium batteries. Perhaps a medium-sized company is one that you might have seen in Tesco's is Oatly. So Oatly is their business is an alternative to dairy products. So you can buy oat milk, or I know you can't call it milk, but oat milk sort of thing, or almond milk, that kind of stuff. So Oatly produced alternative dairy products which are not made from dairy, and what they do is they produce 80% less greenhouse gases than the equivalent to produce the amount of milk, say. 70% less ground is used, grassland, that kind of stuff. And about 60% less energy is used to produce a litre of oat milk, we'll use that as an example, than standard milk. So that's an example of like a medium-sized company. And interestingly, in my bit to try and do the right thing, we now buy Oatly milk from Tesco's instead of the other one that we used to buy, because we know it is greener. And of course, we're invested in it, so we want to support that. The other one, which there's actually two large companies which it didn't even occur to me that they would be dark green until we looked into them. One is, you might think about, is a company called Shimano. So any of you watching this that ride bikes will know Shimano. They make virtually 80% of the gears and brakes of bicycles in the world. Right, massive producer of that. And that's an example of, they are carbon neutral, the way they build everything, but also, investing in companies which make bicycles is on that kind of thing, and so they make dark green. The other one, which really surprised me, is Nestle. And you think, what? I mean, they make shreddies and stuff like that. Well, Nestle are carbon neutral now. They had a target to be carbon neutral in 2022, and now they are neutral. And of course, it doesn't mean that they get it all right, but they have made a massive change in everything. So they have this massive planting program to do the rewilding thing. So over the years, where they bought whatever it is, whether it's soya, where they bought pulp and sugar pulp and all that kind of stuff, they're rewilding all those kind of like areas. So Nestle is okay, they could do better, but they're pretty good, when you compare them to sort of things, say Kellogg's, who then is like a competitor. So they're like perhaps one of the biggest companies that we have. But it's interesting when you come up with the question of Tesla, because people bring up Tesla as like the ideal kind of like green industry. Well, yes, I mean it's better than buying shares in Ford, if you want to have that comparison. And technically speaking, Tesla are dark green, technically. However, the challenge that we do have someone like Tesla is the battery technology. So when we're looking at a company, the question is their product. So you buy a Tesla car. Yes, it's electric and it's better than having a petrol car, right? But obviously the electricity's got to be produced somewhere, and so it's probably from a coal-fired station, which means your car's actually is actually run on coal power. That's effectively what's happening. However, it takes about that much amount of coal, to produce the relevant electricity compared to oil. So it's much better than diesel or oil, because if you were to have a petrol car or diesel car, the amount of electricity, if you had a diesel engine and ran that, if it was just as a generator, the amount of electricity that would produce about the same electricity to power about 12 cars for the same distance. Yet, because it's stuck to the car, it's a lot less. So electric cars are better. The big downside, of course, is what happens when you finish with them, because of at the moment the recycling of lithium batteries is very, very poor. Being able to do it is very, very poor. And certainly with a lot of the older Teslas, which had an older form of lithium battery, that can cause issues. But they're getting on the right side of that. And you look at what the company Ilika is doing with this new technology. That's the kind of thing which will make companies like Tesla actually even more dark green. Because if you could extend the battery life of a Tesla car, and in fact any car twice the length, then that actually reduces the amount of pollution caused by lithium recycling.
We've had one more question come in, then we'll bring this up to an end, David, I think. So, as Article 9 is an EU legislation, what do you see the UK government doing to introduce its own legislation?
I see that they will do absolutely nothing, I think.
Okay.
But, we've decided to adopt it because it's the right thing to do. Whether you think it was the right thing or wrong thing to come out of Europe is your own personal decision. But I think that the present government have no real interest in legislating on this at this stage. Now, the FCA seems quite keen, Financial Conduct Authority seems quite keen to pushing in certain areas to say, this is what we expect to see. And so what I would see is internal regulation coming into play, which says to define something that's sustainable, it must meet this criteria. I would think that's likely to come in over the next couple of years. I'm going to a conference in April where this is being discussed, and the FCA are there. And I think they're a bit on the back foot about it because they've got lots of things to think about, and they clearly don't want to get it wrong. But I don't think it's like there's going to be legislation that will deal with it, but I do think regulation will start to deal with it.
Fabulous, thank you. Anyone any more for any more? Hopefully no one's looks like they're typing furiously. It's not telling me someone is. Thank you for joining us this morning, everyone. Thank you, David, for your time. Anyone watching this on playback or who's with us today, if you do want to reassess your PEG tool, your risk triangle, investment pyramid, as we've called it for years, that visual David shown, if you want to reassess, you want to rediscuss Attenborough, please do let us know. Please arrange a full plan meeting with the team. Come in, let's have a chat, or we can do it Zoom-wise, as some people still want to do, but come and see the new offices. The refurb is not quite fully finished. We're just waiting for some reception desks, but it's done if you want to see the new rooms. Any other follow-up questions, again, please send them in and we'll come back to you individually. And I'm sure if anything we don't know the answer to, we'll happily send up to the investment committee and David. I think you said earlier, David, there might be some communications early next week about the Russia thing. So, keep an eye on your emails.
We're putting some stuff out today, and I know that James wants to do some commentary, so we'll probably put a video out for people with James, who's the head of the investment committee.
Fabulous, thank you. I'll hang around for a minute or two, everyone, just to see in case anyone's got any personal questions or has any more that I can potentially deal with. But otherwise, we'll call that a day. We'll let David go. Thank you, David. Well, we did run an hour in the end. I thought we'd be a bit shorter. We did run an hour in the end, but that's okay. I lost bits of that during that, guys. I hope everyone else didn't. It might have just been me in the office. Thank you for the kind words that have already come in the chat. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you soon. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for your time, everybody.
I'll see you soon.
Cheerio.
Take care. Bye.